6 months later, his mother would be standing in my kitchen, my professional kitchen, with tears running down her face, begging me to cater her birthday party. Standing right there between my 12-burner range and the walk-in cooler where I keep the heritage pork shoulder, crying into a monogrammed handkerchief while my line cooks pretended not to watch. But that night at dinner, all she said was, "It smells a bit strong, doesn't it?" Let me tell you how I got from that dinner table to that kitchen. Friday night, Beaumont's, my restaurant, my kitchen, my rules. Regular service cleared an hour ago. Now the supper club was running. 12 seats, one tasting menu. The dishes I was still figuring out, the fusions that didn't fit the regular menu, the experiments that food writers kept showing up uninvited to taste. 3-month wait list for the regular dining room. The James Beard semi-finalist certificate hung next to the pass-through right beside the Bon Appetit clipping Tasha framed without asking me first. I was plating course 4, a doenjang braised lamb shank with cornbread crumble, working fast on Big Mama Lucille's 4th-generation cast iron skillet, the one she pressed into my hands when I left Savannah for culinary school. "Don't you dare use non-stick," she said. "I haven't." Tasha came through the pass-through. "Your guy's back. He's not my guy. A corner seat. 3rd Friday in a row. Orders every single item on the menu. Eats it in the order you intended." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Nobody eats it in order, Maya. That man is reading your food like a book." I looked through the window. There he was. Corner seat, dark jacket, no tie. Quiet the way some people are loud, taking up space through stillness instead of noise. He was eating my roasted sweet potato with miso brown butter, and his eyes were closed. In the first week, I barely noticed him. The second week, I watched him for 4 seconds and went back to my station. The third week, something in me shifted. He ordered everything again, every single item, ate it in the order I intended it, which almost nobody does. He clearly looked at the menu long enough to understand the arc of the meal. I found myself wanting to know what he thought about the transition between the smoked catfish course and the kimchi collard green soup, because that transition was the thing I was most unsure about. So I did something I almost never do. I untied my apron, handed it to Tasha, and walked out of my kitchen. He looked up when I stopped at his table. Up close, he had a way of going still, like a man who'd learned to measure his reactions carefully. "You've been here 3 weeks, I said. "I have." He didn't apologize for it. Same corner seat. Good sightlines to the kitchen. I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. "Jinwoo Park," he said, and held out his hand. "Maya Beaumont." I shook it. "You ate everything on the menu." "Both times." He picked up his water glass. "The transition between the catfish and the soup is intentional, isn't it? The smoke carries through. You want the memory of one thing to still be in your mouth when the next thing arrives." I looked at him. He wasn't asking. He was telling me what he'd tasted. "Most people don't catch that," I said. "Most people aren't paying attention." He set down the glass. "The doenjang base in the soup is lighter than traditional. You reduced it with something acidic before you added the stock. Buttermilk? Creme fraiche?" He nodded slowly, like that confirmed something. "Why?" The question hit me somewhere unexpected. Not "is it good?" Not "I loved it." Why? Like he understood that every decision in the kitchen is a reason, not just a result. "Southern kitchens run on cultured dairy," I said. "It's in the muscle memory of the cuisine. I wanted the doenjang to feel familiar to both sides of the dish." He was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled just briefly, and it rearranged his face entirely. "Both sides of the dish," he repeated. "That's a precise way to say it." I'm a precise kind of cook. We talked for 40 minutes. He asked questions nobody asks about the sourcing of my heritage pork, about why I use Carolina gold rice instead of Japanese short grain under the galbi, about whether the spice level in the kimchi collard greens was calibrated for a Southern palate or a Korean one. He had opinions, good ones, delivered carefully, like a man who knew his thoughts had weight. He was an architect, It turned out he'd found the pop-up through a food blog. He lived 20 minutes away and had been eating his way through Savannah's restaurant scene, which was how he put it methodically, like a project. "Why'd you come back a second time or two?" I asked. "Because the first meal made me want to understand the second one." He looked at the empty plates in front of him, arranged the way I'd sent them. "And the second made me want to know you." My stomach did something I told it firmly to stop doing. We exchanged numbers at the door. He said he'd like to come back if that was all right. I told him the Friday pop-up was open to the public. He smiled like he knew that wasn't what either of us meant. 3 weeks later, he asked me to come to dinner with his family. I said yes. I cooked. I spent all day on it. Roast chicken glazed with honey and miso, garlic mashed potatoes with brown butter and chives, honey glazed carrots roasted with ginger and sesame. For dessert, my grandmother's lemon tart, the one with the salted crust that makes people close their eyes on the first bite. I packed it carefully. I drove to his parents' house in the suburb north of downtown, the kind of neighborhood where the lawns are geometric and the driveways are long. His mother opened the door. She was small, precise, wearing a linen blouse that probably cost more than my first car. She looked at me the way some women look at things they've already decided about. Jinwoo was right behind her. He put his hand briefly at the small of my back, steadying. "Ayama, this is Maya." "Yes," his mother smiled. It was a complete smile. Perfect. The kind that requires practice. "Come in." The kitchen was large and spotless. I set my bags on the counter. His father, a quiet man with Jinwoo's eyes, nodded from the doorway. His sister-in-law, Sujin, arranged banchan on the table without looking at me. I started to warm the chicken in their oven. His mother walked into the kitchen from the hallway. She stopped near the oven. She tilted her head just slightly. "It smells a bit strong, doesn't it?" She said it pleasantly, like she was commenting on the weather. The chicken had been in the oven for 3 minutes. The miso glaze was just beginning to caramelize, releasing that particular smell, sweet and savory and complex, the kind of smell that makes professional cooks go quiet in the middle of a busy service because it means something is going right. I kept my hands on the counter. I kept my face smooth. "It's the miso," I said. "It deepens as it cooks." She moved to the sink to wash her hands. "We'll see." Sujin looked up from the banchan and looked away again. His father said nothing. Jinwoo came to stand next to me at the counter. He was very still. He didn't say anything either. Dinner was served. His mother ate 3 bites of the chicken and put her fork down. She didn't touch the carrots. She picked at the potatoes. She said the lemon tart was interesting in a tone that meant something other than interesting. Jinwoo ate everything on his plate. Then he reached for more chicken, then had asked me in front of his mother, in front of his silent father and his sister-in-law with her perfect banchan spread whether I'd share the recipe. His mother looked at him. He looked at his plate. I kept my face smooth and my voice warm, and I said I'd be happy to. They had no idea. The woman whose miso chicken smelled a bit strong had a 3-month wait list. The woman whose lemon tart was interesting had been named a James Beard semifinalist 4 months before she walked through their front door. I drove home in silence. I did not cry. Big Mama Lucille did not raise me to cry over dinner tables, but something had settled into the air between me and Jinwoo Park, something unspoken and fragile and real. And I already knew, the way you know these things before you're ready to say them out loud, that the dinner tonight was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of a very long fight. He texted me that night. Not an apology, not an explanation, just 5 words. I should have said something. I stared at my phone for a long time. My kitchen at home was dark, except for the pendant light over the counter, and I was still in my coat because I hadn't bothered to take it off when I came in. The leftover lemon tart was in its container on the passenger seat of my car. I'd forgotten to bring it inside. I typed back, "You ate everything on your plate." His response came fast. That wasn't enough. No, I thought it wasn't. But it was more than his father did, more than Sue Jin. And it told me something I filed away carefully. The way you file a thing you're not ready to act on yet. "Come to the Saturday market with me," he wrote. "I want to show you something." I looked at the tart container through the window. I thought about his mother's smile. I thought about Big Mama Lucille putting a cast iron skillet in my hands and saying some things don't need announcing. "What time?" I typed back. The Broughton Street Farmers Market was one thing, but Jinwoo took me to the Korean grocery in the strip mall off Abercorn, the one I'd been going to alone for 2 years to source my gochugaru and my doenjang and my dried anchovies for stock, the one where I sometimes stood in the fermented paste aisle for too long, just smelling. He didn't know I knew the place. He walked me in like he was giving me a gift, or I led him. We started in the produce section, and he moved through it the way I moved through it, touching things, reading labels, holding containers up to the light. He pulled a fat bulb of garlic from a bin and handed it to me without comment. Then a bundle of perilla leaves, deep green and bright with a smell like mint, crossed with something older, wilder. "Do you use this?" he asked. "Cannep, yes. I sometimes wilt them in sesame oil and use them under seared fish. The flavor is strange and perfect." He smiled. He liked it when I talked about food this way. I could tell because his shoulders dropped a fraction, the way a person relaxes when they realize they're in the right conversation. We moved to the paste wall. Double-doored refrigerator cases lined with tubs of gochujang and doenjang and samjang, every shade of red and brown and amber. I reached for the medium heat gochugaru, the ground chili I use for my glazes, the brick red powder that smells like dried sunshine and warmth. I opened the lid and inhaled. Something crossed his face that I wasn't expecting. Something on guard. "My grandmother used to keep that in a big clay jar," he said, "on the back porch. The smell would come into the kitchen in summer." I didn't think about it as a smell. It was just home. I put the lid back. I set the container in the basket. I didn't say anything for a moment because some things land and need a second to settle. "Big Mama keeps her spices in a cabinet above the stove," I said. "When I was little, I used to stand on a chair and open that cabinet just to breathe it in. Smelled like every good meal that was ever going to happen." He looked at me. Not at my face in the way people look at you to be polite. At me. Like I was a thing worth understanding. "We should get the doenjang," he said. "I know which one. Show me." I did. I walked him through the wall like it was my classroom. "This one is smoother, better for braised. This one has more funk, better for soups. The bite stays. This one is too mild. Pretty label. Disappointing paste." He listened the way he'd listened at the supper club, not to be polite, but because he was actually learning something. Then he turned it around. He picked up a jar of salted fermented shrimp, sayujo, small and pink and pungent. "Do you use this?" "Not yet. It's what my mother puts in her kimchi. It's what makes it hers, specifically. The ratio." I took the jar and looked at it. I was already thinking about what I could do with that brine, reduced and enriched, over roasted cauliflower maybe, or whisked into a butter sauce for grilled oysters. "Can I tell you what I'd do with it?" "Please." I talked for 10 minutes. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he said, "My mother would find that offensive and extraordinary at the same time." Something warm moved through me that I tried to ignore. We ended in the noodle and rice aisle, and I taught him about Carolina Gold rice, the heirloom grain I use at the restaurant, and he told me about the Japanese short grain his mother steams every morning in her rice cooker, precise water ratios, the lid never lifted before the 20-minute rest. We were talking about rice, and we both knew we were talking about something else, about homes, about what food means when it's more than fuel, about the fact that two people could grow up on opposite ends of the world and still understand each other. through what they ate. "This is our language," he said quietly, like he was only half saying it to me. My stomach did the thing again. I let it. We checked out, and he carried both bags to my car, and there was a moment in the parking lot when the October air came off the marsh and I could smell brine and something sweet from the rice vinegar he'd bought. And he was standing close enough that I was aware of exactly how tall he was relative to me, and neither of us moved to break that proximity. "Thank you," I said. "For the market? Thank you for the education." The corner of his mouth moved. "I learned which doenjang not to buy." "You're welcome. That's the most important thing I could have taught you." He laughed, not a polite laugh, a real one. It started in his chest. I had not heard him laugh before. I filed that away too. I did not know, standing there in that parking lot with 2 bags of Korean grocery ingredients in October on the air, that his mother was already planning her next move. The second family dinner was different from the first. Jinwoo had warned me his whole family would be there this time, aunts and cousins and his parents and his brothers Sungjai and Sujin, and it would be at his parents' house. I didn't bring food. I'd offered, but Jinwoo said gently that his mother preferred to cook for her own family gatherings. What I understood from that: the kitchen was not my space. I wore a blue wrap dress. I brought wine. Sujin was already in the kitchen when I arrived, moving with the precise efficiency of someone who had been doing this her whole life. The banchan was laid out like an exhibition. 4 types of kimchi, japchae already in a serving bowl, glossy with sesame oil, savory pancakes stacked in a lacquered tray. Her doenjang jjigae was on the stove, and the smell of it, rich and fermented and warm, made my hands itch to cook. His mother surveyed it all with satisfaction. Sujin made her dongchimi, she said to no one in particular, indicating the pale radish water kimchi in a beautiful ceramic bowl. "She makes it the traditional way. Takes 3 weeks. I stood near the doorway and said, "It looks beautiful." Sujin glanced at me briefly, a small, careful look. "We are almost ready, Hums," his mother said, turning to her son. Then, without looking at me, "Maya, could you rinse the rice? The colander is in the lower cabinet." "Not." "Could you help with anything?" "Not." "What can you do?" "Wash the rice." I found the colander. I washed the rice. I stood at that sink and rinsed each batch until the water ran clear, which takes patience, which takes time. And I kept my face neutral and my hands steady. And I thought about Big Mama standing at her Habersham Street sink on a Sunday morning doing the exact same motion for 20 people's worth of dinner. And I thought, I have spent my whole career in kitchens built on this patience. I set the rinsed rice next to the cooker. His mother did not look at it. When dinner was on the table, Sujin carried out the jjigae herself, set it in the center, and his mother turned to the family and said, "Sujin has outdone herself today." She hadn't said that last time about my chicken. She hadn't said anything about my chicken except that it smelled. Sungjai, Sujin's husband and Jinwoo's older brother, laughed warmly and said his wife was a gifted cook. Sujin tucked her chin in the way people do when they're pleased with themselves but performing modesty. His mother poured tea and said, "It is important, knowing how to cook for a family, knowing what they need." She said it to the table. Everyone at the table understood who it was not directed at. Jinwoo passed me the japchae. His fingers brushed mine. He didn't look up. I ate. Everything was good. The jjigae was excellent. I told Sujin so directly across the table, and she looked startled for a half second before her face resettled into something careful. "Thank you," she said, flat. His mother watched that exchange. Something registered in her eyes, not softness, recalculation. They had no idea. The woman assigned to rinse rice had once catered a governor's gala for 200 guests. But nobody at that table knew that, and I did not volunteer it. Big Mama said some things don't need announcing. I was starting to understand, though, that my silence was both my pride and my vulnerability, and someday those 2 things were going to cost me in ways I hadn't counted yet. 2 days later, I was in the produce section of that same Korean grocery when someone I didn't know leaned around the perilla leaves and said in a bright voice, "Oh, are you Jin Woo's friend? He's mentioned you." The woman was 60 or so, neat in a belted coat, with an expression I'd learned to read, warmth on the surface, assessment underneath. "I am," I said. "I'm Auntie Suk-hee. I'm very close with his mother." She looked at my basket. "Oh, you shop here?" "I do." She looked at the gochugaru and the doenjang in my basket. Her expression adjusted slightly. "You cook Korean food?" "Some." She tilted her head in a way that reminded me exactly of Jinwoo's mother. "His mother's a wonderful cook, very traditional. She worries sometimes, about what her son is eating." I looked at her steadily. "He seems well fed," I said pleasantly. She laughed as if I'd said something naive. "Well, yes." She patted my arm once, lightly, the way you pat something breakable. "It is a lot to learn. Korean cooking takes years, real years." Then she smiled her complete smile and moved on down the aisle. I stood there with my gochugaru and my doenjang, and I thought, she is going to carry this conversation back to his mother. Every word of it, stripped of whatever context made it neutral and loaded with whatever context served the conclusion she'd already reached. She was not finished. The week after that, Jinwoo mentioned casually that his mother's friends held a regular cooking gathering, potluck at the church hall every other Saturday, women bringing dishes, sharing recipes, the usual. He said his mother had suggested once that Maya might like to come along. I told him I'd love to. He didn't say anything. The silence lasted just long enough for me to understand. She withdrew the invitation. She said, Jinwoo started carefully, that it was a Korean cooking circle, that it might not be, her word was, relevant to you. I set down my spatula. The kitchen at my apartment smelled like the shrimp stock I was reducing for dinner. The burner was on medium low, and the smell was oceanic and deep, the kind of smell that takes an hour to build and 4 seconds to ruin if you look away. "Relevant," I repeated. "Maya." "I heard you." I think she meant... I know what she meant. I picked up the spatula again. "The stock is almost done. Stay for dinner." He stayed. He ate 2 bowls of the shrimp bisque with the toasted cornbread, and he asked for the recipe, and we both understood the pattern we were already in, me cooking and him eating what his family rejected, this small and growing archive of everything they wouldn't taste. After dinner, he tried again. "I'm going to talk to her." I looked at him across the table. His jaw was set, and I could see the frustration in him, the genuine anger at what his mother had done. And I also saw something else, something underneath the anger, the fear of what happens when he speaks and she doesn't change. "Okay," I said. He did talk to her. He came back and told me so. He said he'd told her the invitation she'd withdrawn was unkind. He said she looked at him for a long moment and then said, "I am trying to protect this family." I thought about that. Protect the family. From what? From me. That Sunday, Mama Denise called at 6 p.m. on the dot. Same as always. I answered in my kitchen, one hand stirring a pot of collard greens I was testing for nothing in particular, just to have something to do with my hands. "How are you eating, Maya?" "I'm fine, Mama." She waited. Mama Denise has a weight that could make a federal witness crack. I lasted about 4 seconds. "It's fine," I said. "His family is just... there's an adjustment period." "Mm-hmm." That tone. "What kind of adjustment?" I told her about the potluck, just that part, just the withdrawal of an invitation with the word relevant. I kept my voice even. The line was quiet for a moment. "Baby," she said, "does he let his mother talk to you like that? Or does he watch his mother talk to you like that?" I stopped stirring. It was such a precise question. Not did his mother do this. Did he let her? Did he watch her? "He's trying," I said. "Trying is a starting place," she said. "It is not a destination. You hear me?" "I hear you, Mama." After we hung up, I stood at the stove for a long time, 2 hours later, Auntie Carolyn called. Mama had talked to Auntie Carolyn. Of course she had. She said, "What?" Auntie Carolyn's voice went up a full octave. She said Korean cooking wasn't relevant to you. Auntie, I'm fine. No, baby, you are not fine because I am not fine. Korean cooking is not relevant to you. The woman who smokes short rib is in Bon Appetit. The woman who has been using gochujang in her glazes since she was 22 years old. She made a sound I can only describe as sustained outrage. And what did this man say? What did he do? He talked to her. He talked to her. She repeated it the way you repeat something that contains its own verdict. Baby, I will drive to Savannah. I will bring my gumbo. I will show that woman what food that actually smells like something looks like. Auntie Carolyn, she said, your food smells? You know what smells? Disrespect. Disrespect smells, and I can detect it from the highway. She took a breath. I'm just saying the offer stands. I have a cooler and a full tank of gas. I laughed. I had not laughed in about 3 days, and it surprised me when it came out, this genuine, relieved laugh that loosened something in my chest. I love you, I said. I love you too, baby. Now you call me if that man doesn't get his act together. I have thoughts. I have many thoughts, and I am not afraid to share them. I felt lighter after she hung up. Not because anything had changed, but because I had people, real people, who saw the whole thing clearly and were outraged on my behalf. And sometimes that is exactly what you need to straighten your spine for the next round. They had no idea. Every Friday night, the very community she was trying to protect her family from having to navigate was standing in a line outside my restaurant, turning down other reservations to wait for a table. But that community didn't overlap with his mother's church hall. It hadn't yet. And that was the thing I kept thinking about, that quiet accumulation of distance between what I was and what she believed I was. It was a distance that was going to collapse eventually. I just didn't know when. Jinwoo and I fell into a rhythm after that. He came to my apartment for dinner most Thursdays. Not always for a full meal, sometimes just to sit at the counter while I developed recipes and talk about the week. He brought good wine and terrible opinions about architecture trends, which he knew were terrible and delivered as a kind of joke. And I started to look forward to Thursday in a way I hadn't looked forward to a specific day of the week since culinary school. One Thursday, I was testing a new dish. He watched me work for a while and then said, "Can I try?" I looked at him. Try what? Cooking something. I handed him a knife and set an onion on the board. It was almost funny. He held the knife the way an architect holds a pen, which is to say correctly in terms of grip, but wrong in terms of application. He made his first cut and produced 2 large, uneven pieces that bore no resemblance to a dice. Not like that, I said. I can see that. Here. I came around the counter and put my hand over his on the knife handle, adjusting his grip. Your knuckles guide the blade. You curl your fingers. The knife doesn't lift, it rocks. He tried again. The cut was better. Still not right. Better, I said. You're being kind. I'm being accurate. That was better. He chopped for another 10 minutes, producing the most irregular mirepoix I have ever seen, and I was mostly watching him instead of the onion, because there was something endearing and real about watching a man who was precise and controlled in every other area of his life be genuinely bad at something and stay with it anyway. He was sweating slightly from concentration, not heat. "Why are you smiling here?" He asked. "I'm not." "You are." "The onion is very small," I said. "You've been working on it for 12 minutes. He set the knife down, looked at his pile of irregular onion pieces, and laughed. That chest laugh again, the real one. It transformed his whole face. "This is humbling," he said. "Welcome to every chef's first lesson. Nobody is good at this before they're good at it." "How old were you when you first learned to chop?" 6. Big Mama stood over me with a towel and caught every piece I dropped. He picked up the knife again. He finished the onion. I added it to the pan, and the pieces cooked unevenly, some crisp and some soft. And it gave the dish a texture I hadn't planned for, actually interesting in its own way. I tasted it. Huh? I said. What? It's good. Your terrible chopping made it better. He looked briefly delighted. I'm adding that to my professional biography. You absolutely should not. We cooked together most of that evening, him doing the work he could be trusted with, the washing and measuring and occasionally the stirring, and me doing everything that required skill. And there was something in the shape of that, something domestic and easy and warm that I hadn't felt with another person in a long time. When he left at 11, he paused in the doorway. Maya. I just want you to know. He looked at me for a moment with the direct, considering look that I was starting to count on. That whatever my family says, whatever happens at those dinners, this is real. What's here between us? I held on to that. 2 days later, his mother called him. She called every day now, which Jinwoo mentioned almost in passing, like it was a normal thing, the daily inventory check. What did you eat for breakfast? Did she cook it? How was the seasoning? He would answer carefully and then change the subject. She would call again the next morning. He told me about the calls on a Saturday while we were walking by the river. He said it lightly, almost as a joke, about his mother's growing concern for the quality of his diet. I stopped walking. She calls every day. In the morning, usually, to ask what you ate. And then she calls my brother, he said, to cross-reference. I looked at the Savannah River moving under the gray October sky. Does she ask about the recipe? He was quiet for a beat. Sometimes. Does she ask if I cooked it? Another beat. Yes. I started walking again. Some things you absorb in silence. The daily call, the cross-reference, the recipe inventory, the architecture of attrition, daily and accumulating. I thought about what she was building. I thought about what I was building too. The week after that, Jinwoo came to me with a different kind of look on his face. Not the usual Thursday warmth, something tight around his jaw. My father wants to talk to me, he said, about his company, about the future. I looked at him. In 4 months, I had learned to read Jinwoo Park's face the way I read a kitchen, knowing which burner runs hot, where the cold spots are. I saw the shape of this conversation before he spoke it. His father ran an import distribution company across the Southeast. Jinwoo had always assumed he'd have a role in it. Not because he'd chosen it, but because it was expected. A park son working for a park company. Structural, like load-bearing walls. He said, Jinwoo started and then stopped. Tell me. He said that a man who is making decisions his family doesn't support is a man who is walking away from everything the family built. He said it flatly, like he was reading from a document. He said the company has always gone to family, to the right kind of family. The right kind. He said he needs to know you're serious about what matters, Jinwoo continued, still in that flat voice. The family, the business, the legacy. And if you're not, he didn't finish that sentence. He didn't have to. There it was. The financial architecture behind the personal one. She wasn't just a woman with opinions. She was backed by a system, the business, the inheritance, the accumulated weight of expectation that Jinwoo had been living inside his entire life. What did you say to him? I asked. I said I would handle it. That's not an answer. I know. His jaw was still tight, but something underneath it had shifted. I told him that who I choose to spend my time with is not a business decision, that it has never been a business decision, and that if he wanted to make it one, that was his choice, not mine. I held very still. He wasn't pleased. No, he wasn't. I leaned on the counter. I need you to know something. I am not asking you to choose anything. I see what's happening. I see the pattern, and I'm not going anywhere because of their pressure. But I also need you to be honest with me about what you're willing to do. He looked up. Because I've been in kitchens my whole life, I said, and I know what it looks like when someone's cooking with the heat too high. Things burn, things you can't unburn. He was quiet for a long moment. I'm not going to let that happen, he said, but I need you to trust me. Okay, I said. That was the evening I told him about the skillet. We were sitting at my kitchen counter, the wine open, the remains of dinner between us, the city quiet outside. He'd asked about the cast iron I used for everything, the one that lived permanently on my back burner, dark and seasoned and heavy with a century of cooking absorbed into its surface. "That's Big Mama's," I said. I picked it up. It weighed probably 10 pounds. I held it easily, the grip familiar as a handshake. 4 generations, I said. Started with my great-great-grandmother, passed to Big Mama at her wedding, passed to my grandmother Lucille's mother before that, I think, though the family story gets blurry past the 3rd generation. What we know is that nobody has ever washed it with soap. You season it with oil after every use. You build the surface over years, over meals, over every family dinner anyone ever cooked in it. Jinwoo was watching me with the particular stillness he had. "When I left for culinary school," I said, "Big Mama didn't give me a going away party. She didn't give me advice or a speech. She wrapped this skillet in her good dish towel, the Sunday one, and she put it in my hands. She said, 'Some things are yours to carry now.'" My voice was steady. I'd told this story before in interviews, in the Bon Appetit piece, once at a dinner with other chefs. But telling it here in my own kitchen to him felt different, like the story had more weight in this room than it had anywhere else. "She didn't mean the skillet," I said. "She meant the knowledge, the tradition, the line of women who cooked in this thing and fed their families and built their lives around tables. She was handing me that line." Jinwoo reached out and touched the rim of the skillet, just the edge of his finger. "Careful." "It's warm," he said. "It holds heat longer than any pan I own. Keeps it even. No hot spots, no cold spots. When it's right, it's absolutely right every time." He looked at me. "Is that why you use it for everything?" "Partly. Partly because it was hers. Every time I use it, I'm cooking with her. A little bit." He was quiet. The good kind of quiet. The kind that means something landed. "My grandmother was similar," he said after a moment. "Not a skillet. She had this set of stone bowls she'd brought from Korea. Heavy, pale gray. She made dalsop bibimbap in them, the stone bowl that gets hot enough to crisp the rice at the bottom. She died when I was 12. My mother kept the bowls. I don't know where they are now." He paused. "I don't think my mother uses them. They reminded her too much." "Your mother lost someone important," I said. "She did. Grief does things to people." He looked at me with something more careful than gratitude. "You're being generous." "I'm being honest. Understanding what something is doesn't mean it's acceptable." I set the skillet back on its burner. "Your mother is wrong about me. That doesn't change whether I understand why she got there." He poured more wine. "My father sat at the dinner table last night," he said, "while she called the potluck exclusion a minor misunderstanding, not agreeing, not disagreeing, just sitting in his silence while she rewrote it. That's who he is in this. Always been." He turned the wine glass by its stem. "I was raised in a system where the domestic space belongs to my mother entirely. And my father's silence in it has always been his permission." "You've been thinking about this for a while?" I said. "Since the night of the chicken dinner." He met my eyes. "I sat next to you at that counter and I didn't say anything. I've thought about that every day since. You ate everything on your plate." "I should have done more. You're doing more now." Something shifted in his face. He was still carrying a lot of weight, but underneath it was a man who was choosing to stay in a situation that would have been much easier to leave. I wanted to tell him something true and possibly more than I was ready to say. But the moment moved on, and I filed it away with all the other almost things. 2 weeks later, he came to my apartment on a Wednesday instead of Thursday. He said he had something he needed to tell me. He sat down at the counter and put both hands around his coffee cup and said, "She's escalating." His mother had begun calling twice a day, morning and evening. The morning call covered what he'd eaten for breakfast and whether I'd been there. The evening call covered whether he was having dinner at home, meaning his parents' home, this week. Whether he'd thought about the family trip to visit his father's business contacts in Atlanta the following month. Whether he'd spoken to Seung-jae about the company's new distribution expansion. Each call was perfectly ordinary and completely not. She's threading everything through family business, he said, so that every time I choose not to go to dinner there or not to attend a company event, I'm also choosing against the family, against my brother, against my father's legacy. I watched his face. She's good at this, I said. She has had 35 years of practice. I picked up my coffee. What do you need from me right now? He looked up, that straightforward look that still got to me. Even then, maybe especially then. I just need you to know, he said. So you understand why I may seem distracted sometimes, why I may not always be as present? Yes. I set my coffee down. I reached across the counter and covered his hands with mine. His knuckles were cold. He looked at our hands. Jin Woo, I am a woman who has been running a business since she was 24 years old. I know what it looks like when someone is carrying a system on their shoulder. I gave his hands a brief, steady pressure. I'm not going anywhere. He turned his hands over and held mine for a moment. Then he looked up and said, I know what you make of me. What do I make of you? Someone worth the effort. My heart did something I didn't have a name for yet. You're not wrong, I said. The Saturday after that, I was developing a new dish. I'd been thinking about it for weeks, ever since the Korean market, ever since standing in front of that paste wall with Jin Woo and talking about what made food taste like home to two different people from two different kitchens. I had an idea. It was technically demanding and emotionally risky, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. Doenjang, braised short ribs, low and slow, the Korean fermented paste broken down in a bath of dashima stock and mirin, the meat falling apart in that specific way. That means collagen and patience finally found each other. But Finnish Southern, cornbread with a crackle crust, pan drippings gravy made from the braised liquid, the whole thing scattered with pickled red onions that had a bite of apple cider vinegar against the deep umami of the braise. Both worlds on one plate. Jin Woo came over mid-afternoon to find me mid-construction. The short ribs were in the oven, the braised smell already filling the apartment, rich and saline and complex. What is that? He said from the doorway. Sit down and you'll find out. He sat. He watched me work. I made the cornbread batter from scratch, the real way with buttermilk and bacon grease and coarse ground cornmeal, poured it into the cast iron skillet and put it in the oven next to the braise. The smell shifted and deepened when the cornbread started, the dairy and the salt and the corn meeting the doenjang and the mirin in the oven air. He inhaled slowly. That smells like, he started. Like what? He looked uncertain, like he was reaching for something and couldn't quite find it. Like something I can't explain, like both things at once, like it shouldn't work and it does. I pulled the short ribs. The braised liquid was reduced to a glossy, dark, deeply fragrant sauce. I plated ribs over a thick slice of the cornbread, sauce spooned over the top, pickled onion scattered, a fresh perilla leaf for color. I set it in front of him. He picked up his fork and looked at the dish for a moment before he tasted it. He always did that. Looked first. I used to find it merely interesting. Now I found it one of the most specific things about him. This man who understood that looking was the first form of attention. He tasted. He went very still. He tasted again. The short rib first, then the cornbread soaked with braised liquid, then a forkful of everything together. He set down his fork and looked at me. I was watching from the other side of the counter, dish towel over my shoulder, waiting. Maya, he said, tell me what you taste. He shook his head. My grandmother's kitchen and your grandmother's kitchen. At the same time, in the same bite, something hit me in the chest. That's what I was going for, I said. You got it. He picked up the fork again. You more than got it. We were quiet for a while after that, the kind of quiet that happens after something moves through a room that is larger than words. The apartment was warm from the oven, and it smelled like the best version of both our childhoods. And there was wine open on the counter, and outside the Savannah evening was doing what it always did in late October, going blue and cool and still. He looked up at me. I was already looking at him. The air between us changed, not suddenly. The way weather changes, pressure first, and then the temperature, and then you're aware that something has been building for longer than you noticed. We had been building toward this for 4 months. Through a Korean grocery aisle and a failed onion dice, and his father's quiet threats, and his mother's daily inventory calls, and his hands over mine at the counter on a Wednesday morning. Through every dish I'd cooked and every bite he'd taken, he set down his fork again. He stood up from the stool and came around the counter. He was close enough now that I could feel the warmth off him, and I could see the question forming in his expression. And my heart was doing something very loud and entirely inconvenient, and I was still holding the dish towel because I had forgotten to put it down. "Maya," he said, "just my name." Quiet. I looked up at him. His eyes dropped to my lips. Mine did the same, just for a moment. "Jinwoo." His hand came up and touched my jaw, just the edge of his fingers. The most careful touch imaginable, like something he had been deciding for a long time and only just allowed himself. The dish towel fell out of my hands. Neither of us looked at it. The apartment was warm, and the oven was still ticking down from the heat of the cornbread and the braise. And the two of us were standing in the center of the kitchen that smelled like both our homes at once. And his face was the closest it had ever been to mine, and I was aware of every inch of the distance that remained between us. "I've been wanting to do this," he said, "for 4 months. You should have started with the first Friday." The corner of his mouth moved. "Some things are worth waiting for," he said. And that was when his phone rang. His phone rang in the space between us. The sound cracked through the kitchen like a plate dropped on tile. I felt him exhale before he stepped back. One breath, one step, and just like that, the air between us returned to being ordinary air. He looked at the screen. His jaw did that thing it did when the news was going to cost him. "It's my mother." I bent and picked up my dish towel from the floor. I folded it, set it on the counter. "You should get it," I said. My voice came out steady. I was proud of that. He answered in Korean, his voice carefully neutral. I turned back to the dishes. I could hear her through the phone. Not the words, but the rhythm of her. Quick, directive, certain. He walked to the far end of the kitchen, 8 feet between us. It might as well have been the width of the Pacific. The apartment still smelled like both our grandmothers. He hung up. He came back to the counter. He didn't sit. "She wants Sunday dinner," he said. "She wants to discuss the family's future." I looked at him. The question we'd been building toward for 4 months was still there between us, warm and quiet like the oven cooling down. "Then go to Sunday dinner," I said. "We're not going anywhere." He reached out and touched my hand, just briefly, the backs of my knuckles against his palm. "No," he said, "we're not." He stayed another hour. He didn't eat, neither did I. We sat at opposite ends of the counter, and the kitchen held us both. The smell of the cornbread still in the air, the braised liquid cooling on the stove. Neither of us knew what to do with the silence, so we left it alone. When he finally left, I cleaned the kitchen until it was spotless. Every trace of her visit gone. Then I stood there for a long time, both our grandmother's kitchens in the same plate, called confusion. I pressed my palm flat against the cast iron skillet's handle. It was still warm. That pan had seen everything this kitchen had ever been, the good Thursdays and the complicated ones, my grandmother's tradition and his grandmother's memory, and the dish we'd made together. The dish she'd held in her hands and decided she already understood. I put the container in the refrigerator. I went to bed. 3 days later, I was developing a new variation. Short ribs in the oven, cornbread batter ready in the cast iron. I was tasting the braise when I heard a knock. Not the apartment buzzer, the door. He didn't come in the way he usually came in. With wine and loose shoulders and 4 months of Thursday nights behind him, he came in like something was already wrong. Behind him was his mother. Yoon-hee Park stood in my doorway in a cream wool coat, her hair immaculate, her face arranged into something that looked like composure but wasn't. She scanned the kitchen the way she'd scanned my bags that first night in her house, looking for what she'd already decided to find. She found the counter, the gochujang next to the hot sauce, the doenjang paste, the open jar of bacon grease, his mother's world and my world, side by side on my counter, mingling in the kitchen air the same way they mingled in the dish in the oven. She walked in without being invited. I was in the neighborhood, she said, which I did not believe. She moved to the stove. She looked at the container of the fusion dish. She picked it up, turned it in her hands, read the layers of it with her eyes, the ribs over cornbread, the dark braised, the pickled onions. She set it back down. "This is not food," she said. Her voice was perfectly calm, the way a flat line on a monitor is calm. "This is confusion." The oven clicked. The cornbread was almost done. I did not say anything. I held the wooden spoon and I held my face and I made myself breathe through it the way you breathe through a burn, slow and steady until the sharp part passes. Jin-woo said, "Iyama." She turned to him like I wasn't in the room. "I've made an arrangement, a dinner, this Saturday. Soo-hyun's daughter will be there." She adjusted her coat sleeve. "She understands what a real kitchen looks like." The oven ticked. "Jin-woo," she said. This, not a question, an announcement. He said nothing, and his silence was not the good kind. She walked to the door. She paused. "I will see you Sunday." She left. Jin-woo stood very still with both hands at his sides. I set down the wooden spoon. I pulled the cornbread from the oven. I did these things because I needed somewhere to put my hands. The kitchen that had held us 20 minutes ago now felt like a different place entirely. "Maya," he said. "Don't," I said, not unkindly, not right now. He came and stood beside me and we both looked at the fusion dish. Both our grandmother's kitchens called confusion. I pressed my palm against the cast iron skillet's handle. Still warm. "Cancel Saturday," I said. "Already decided," he said. He stayed another hour. He didn't eat. Neither did I. When he left, I cleaned the kitchen until it was spotless. Every trace of that visit gone. He canceled Saturday. His mother found out. What followed was the week I would come to think of as the walls closing in. The church circle got louder. I heard it through Auntie Carolyn, who had a friend in Savannah, who had a friend in the Korean church community. The word going around the Saturday potlucks. Jin-woo Park's girlfriend served some confused mix of cuisines, that she was nice enough but not suitable. Suitable. I was a James Beard Award semi-finalist. I had a 3-month waitlist and catering contracts with 2 of the largest corporations in the Southeast. And I was not suitable. I set down my phone and went into the restaurant kitchen and cooked for 6 hours straight. Tasha appeared at the pass. "You want to tell me what happened?" "Not even slightly." She handed me a tasting spoon. "The beurre blanc is broken." "Tell me why." I tasted it. "You added the butter too fast when the reduction was still too hot." "There she is." She took the spoon back. "Go home, Maya." I went home. I sat at my kitchen counter and thought about the word suitable and about the woman in the cream coat standing in my kitchen calling my food confusion and about Big Mama's skillet sitting on the stove in the room where that happened. Some things are yours to carry now. I was carrying them. I was still carrying them. The next family dinner was 2 Sundays later. I went because Jin-woo asked me to, and because I was not going to become someone who disappeared at the first application of pressure. Soo-jin had outdone herself. She'd made Yoon-hee Park's favorite dish, galbijim, the braised short ribs in soy and Asian pear that takes all day and fills the house with a sweet savory smell that means effort, means devotion, means I belong here and you don't. She brought 3 banchan she made herself and a batch of kimchi she'd been fermenting for a month specifically for this occasion. She mentioned that detail twice. and she had made enough food that everyone was full before my dish came to the table. I had brought japchae, glass noodles with vegetables and sesame oil, modest and beautiful, sitting untouched next to Sujin's spread. His mother tasted the galbi and closed her eyes. "This," she said, "this is what it's supposed to taste like." She ate 2 full bowls. She served herself banchan. She poured tea for Shungjai. She did not touch the japchae. No one touched the japchae. I sat next to Jinwoo and kept my face warm and open and did not let a single thing I was feeling reach my expression. Big Mama in my head. Never let them see you bleed. Jinwoo reached under the table and found my hand. He held it there, hidden, his thumb moving once across my knuckles. Steady, back at my place by 9. He sat at the counter with both hands around his tea mug, staring at it. I put the leftover japchae in the refrigerator. "My father called this week," he said. "The board meets next month. There's a question of partnership, who comes into the inner structure." He paused. "Who doesn't? He's made it official. He's making it formal." His voice was flat. "It is no longer just his opinion that I'm making the wrong choice. It is now being documented." Jinwoo. I know. I put down the cloth. I walked around the counter and stood in front of him. "Whatever they document," I said, "that dinner tonight, the japchae no one touched. The galbi she made so everyone would be full before my dish was served." I held his gaze. "They can do all of that, but they cannot make me small. You understand?" Something moved through his face. Pain and love and something that looked very much like determination. "I know they can't," he said. "I need to hear that you know it. I know it, quietly, like a vow." "You are the most unsmall person I have ever met." I laughed a little, despite everything. He didn't laugh. He set down the mug. He took both my hands. "Last week," he said, before my phone rang. He paused. "I've been thinking about it every day since." So have I." Then can I say what I was going to say? "Please," I said quietly. He went to the refrigerator. He opened it. He looked at the container on the middle shelf, the japchae I'd just put away, the dish his whole family had declined to taste. He took it out. He didn't heat it. He picked up a fork from the dish rack, and he stood at my kitchen counter, not even sitting down, just standing there. And he ate every piece of glass noodle, every shred of carrot and spinach, every sesame-glossed bite that his entire family had looked past at her own table 2 hours ago, standing up, not sitting, not even sitting. I stood on the other side of the counter and watched him do it, and I could not tell you what my face was doing, but whatever it was honest. And then he set the fork down and looked at me. "This is the best thing I've ever tasted." I couldn't speak. "Everything you make." He shook his head once, slowly. "Everything you make is the best thing I've ever tasted, every single time." He looked at me with those direct, dark eyes that I had learned could hold everything they needed to hold without flinching. "And I love you. I love you. I love everything you make. I love everything you are." The kitchen went quiet in a way that was entirely different from the earlier silences. This was a full quiet, a quiet that held something in it. I came around the counter. He opened his arms and I walked into them, and he held me the way you hold something you almost lost, firmly and with the specific knowledge of what almost means. My face was against his shoulder and my eyes were burning, and I was not going to cry, but it was close. It was very close. The empty japchae container sat on the counter behind him, and I could smell sesame oil and 12 hours of history in this kitchen, and both our grandmothers somehow, the way they were always somehow present when food was involved. I thought about a Sunday in October when he laughed from his chest in a parking lot, and I filed that away because I wasn't ready to know what it meant. I was ready now. "I love you," I said into the fabric of his jacket. "I have been in love with you since the Korean market, since you told me about your grandmother's clay jar on the back porch, and I thought, this man understands that a smell is a home." He pressed his face to the top of my head. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "October," he said. "I'm calculating how many months I wasted." "You didn't waste them?" You were building something? We were building something. Yes. He held me tighter for a moment. And in that kitchen, at that counter with the empty container and the smell of sesame and the cast iron skillet on its burner, I felt something in my chest settle into a place it had been trying to reach for months. This exact thing, this was what I was fighting for. I pulled back and looked at him. His hands were still on my arms. Whatever they do next, I said, I need you to know that I'm not going to disappear. But I'm also not going to be small for anyone, not for a dinner table, not for a church circle, not for anyone. I know, he said. He said it with the certainty of a man who had been watching me for months and had reached his conclusion slowly and completely. I have known that since the first Friday. I believed him. I did not know yet what was coming. His father formalized the ultimatum the following week, a meeting in his office. The terms were clear. By the end of the quarter, a decision. The business, the partnership, the inheritance, the legacy his grandfather had started with 14 products and 1 truck in 1983, all of it waiting on one choice. Jinwoo told me afterward, flat-voiced and steady. I told him I'd made my decision, he said. I told him it wasn't the one he wanted, and I told him I hoped he'd reconsider what he was willing to lose. I pressed my hand against his chest just to feel him there, solid, choosing to be there. I see you, Jinwoo Park, I said. I see exactly who you are. He covered my hand with his. 2 weeks after that, I got the call about the catering event, corporate anniversary gala, Hendricks Distribution, one of the largest logistics firms in the Southeast. 75 guests, black tie, the company's 40th anniversary. I'd been hired 6 weeks earlier, contract signed, menu set. I was in my walk-in cooler checking inventory when Tasha appeared in the doorway. Her face told me before she spoke. The event coordinator called, she said. The client received a complaint from someone described as a concerned community member, food safety practices, filed formally with the health department. I stared at her. Anonymous, she said. Specific complaints about cross-contamination in our prep kitchen. They've requested an inspection before the event. She met my eyes. Maya, if there's any delay in the inspection process, the event gets pushed or canceled. The walk-in was cold. I had been in cold kitchens my whole life. This was a different kind of cold. Our kitchen is spotless, I said. I know. 3 years of perfect inspection records. I know. Her jaw was tight. The complaint was specific enough that it sounds like someone who knows our operation. The language. I stood there in the cold. I thought about who had been in this restaurant, who had stood in this kitchen, who had standing in the Savannah business community and access to a phone and the willingness to use both against me. She made a phone call, I said. Tasha said nothing. She didn't have to. I stood in that cold for a long time. The inspection came back clean. Of course it did. 3 years of perfect scores do not happen by accident. They happen because you care more about your kitchen than you care about anything except the food that comes out of it. But the 48 hours of administrative back and forth cost us the client's confidence. We pulled off the gala perfectly. Every course, on time, every plate, exact. The coordinator called me afterward, warmly and professionally, to say they'd be going in a different direction for future engagements, replaced before I'd even invoiced the last one. I sat in my empty restaurant at 11 at night, holding my phone, the rice I washed in someone else's sink, the dish I made that was called confusion, the japchae no one ate while Sujin's galbi Jim got seconds, and now this, a phone call to a health department, anonymous, designed to arrive at exactly the right moment to do exactly the right damage. My professional kitchen. She had come from my professional kitchen. This kitchen was mine to carry. These hands, these 12 years, this reputation built from nothing, from a pop-up supper club and borrowed equipment and a palate that wouldn't let me stop until every dish was right. I had built this from scratch. No family money, No connections, no inheritance, just skill and patience and the knowledge that food made with love speaks for itself. I was not going to let anyone make my kitchen a battlefield. I called Jinwoo. He answered on the second ring. I told him everything. The complaint, the inspection, the coordinator's call, calmly, clearly, the way I run a service. No wasted words, just facts. He was quiet after I finished. Maya, he said, I need you to hear something without trying to fix it. Okay. I took a breath. I have spent my whole life building something with my hands. Every meal, every contract, every person who stood in line for 3 months for one of my tables. My voice was steady. I needed it to be steady for this. I will not let your family spit on it. Silence. Jinwoo. My throat was tight, but my voice held. I love you, and nothing I'm about to say changes that, but I cannot keep serving my heart on a plate to people who throw it in the trash. I need some time. Away from your family, away from the dinners and the attacks and the waiting for the next thing to break. The silence on his end was different from his usual silence. I'm not ending this, I said, but I need a break. He breathed once. Maya, please, I need you to understand. A long pause. I understand, he said. His voice was rough. I don't want this, but I understand. Thank you, Maya. A break in his voice. Just a small one. I'm sorry for everything she did. I am so sorry. I know. We hung up. I sat in my empty restaurant until midnight. The kitchen behind me was clean and quiet. Every surface spotless, every pan in its place. This kitchen, mine, built from a pop-up supper club and borrowed equipment and 12 years of not sleeping enough. Built from Big Mama's recipes and a cast iron skillet and the conviction that food made with love and intention speaks for itself. I pressed my hands flat on the bar top. I felt the cool solidity of it under my palms. Some things are yours to carry. I was still carrying them, and I was going to keep carrying them on my terms, in my kitchen, at my pace, without apology. She would think she had won. I knew that. I let her think it, because what she did not know, what none of them knew, was that she had spent 6 months trying to make me question my own hands, and she had failed. My hands were exactly as certain as they had always been. They still knew when the roux was ready. They still knew how to build a dish from 2 grandmothers' kitchens into something neither culture had made alone. And the distance between Jinwoo and me was going to give him the space to figure out what he was made of. I already knew. I had known since October in a parking lot off Abercorn when he laughed from his chest for the first time, and I filed it away because I wasn't ready yet. I turned off the lights. I walked out. I locked the door behind me, my kitchen, my hands, my terms. The next morning, Jinwoo went to his mother. He told me about it later in a voice no longer tight with the effort of holding itself together. He said he'd sat across from her in her kitchen, the kitchen that had always been hers, with her rules and her standards and her certainty. And he had said what he needed to say. He told her she hadn't just insulted the food. He told her she had insulted the person he loved, the person he had chosen, the person he was going to keep choosing. He told her he had watched her from the beginning. The comments and the withdrawals and the dinner arrangements and the competition she engineered between Soo-jin and me at her own table. He had watched it all and stayed quiet and told himself he was protecting everyone. And he had been wrong. He said, you didn't just insult her food. You insulted the person I love, and I let you. His mother looked at him for a long time without speaking. He didn't tell me what her face did in that moment. I could imagine it. He was alone now in the way that happens when you step out of a system that has held you your entire life. The business meetings stopped. The Sunday dinners went unsaid. His phone rang less. He was quiet. He was figuring out what a man does when he has finally stopped letting other people define the shape of his love. I was in my kitchen. That was where I needed to be. He went to Tasha on a Tuesday. I know this because she told me later, when there was finally a later. She said he appeared at the back door of Beaumont's during prep service in his work clothes, still carrying his jacket, like he'd driven straight from his office without deciding to until he was already in the car. Tasha cracked the door and looked at him. "She's not here," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm here for you." She looked at him for a long beat. Tasha has a way of looking at a person that strips the politeness down to what's actually being said underneath it. "Why?" she said. He didn't flinch. "Because I need to learn Big Mama's gumbo recipe, the real one, and you're the only person who has it." Tasha crossed her arms. "I'm also the person who's watched Maya cry in walk-in coolers for 3 weeks, so you're going to need to do better than that." He did. She told me he stood at that back door for 15 minutes. He told her about October in a grocery store parking lot. He told her about the japchae he ate standing up without heating it because he needed her to know that whatever his family rejected, he was going to eat every single bite. He told her about sitting across from his mother in her kitchen, the kitchen that had always been hers, and saying out loud what he had let happen. He said, "I don't know how to fix what I broke with my silence, but I know the language she speaks, and I am going to learn to speak it back to her." Tasha let him in. She made him handwrite the recipe as she said it out loud, the measurements, the sequence, the roux, which she explained 3 times, slow and dark, stirring until your arm gives out and the color of wet cardboard becomes the color of chocolate. She told him about the trinity, the onion and celery and bell pepper that goes in when the roux is ready. She told him about the order of the proteins, the sausage before the shrimp, always. She told him never to stop stirring the roux, not for a single second, or it would burn and the whole pot would have to start over. He copied it all. His handwriting was careful, an architect's handwriting. He went home and he made it. I don't know how many times he tried it before he came to me. What I know is what I tasted. I know the roux broke. She told me his notes had a line crossed out. Stirred wrong, started over again. The second attempt burned. Third was close, but the seasoning was off because he'd misread tablespoon as teaspoon. Fourth was the one he brought. Lumpy roux, too much cayenne, rice that had gone too long and was somewhere between al dente and just past it. He knocked on my door on a Thursday the way he always had. I opened it. He was standing there in a jacket I recognized, the dark one with the clean lapels, and he was holding a covered pot with both hands like it weighed something more than cast iron, which it did. "I made something," he said. The smell hit me before anything else. Cayenne first, too much of it, punchy and sharp, then underneath, the low, sweet, fermented depth that was the roux, broken but real. Something dark and warm and familiar in the base of it. Big Mama's gumbo. Not right. Not even close to right, but unmistakably hers. That recipe in her handwriting, through Tasha's voice, through his uncertain hands, was sitting in that pot. I stepped back and let him in. He set the pot on the stove. He lifted the lid. I looked at the roux, floating in pieces, the too much cayenne orange red on the surface, the rice not quite separate, the whole thing beautifully, honestly wrong. "The roux broke, Warhead," he said. "I can see that. I started over 3 times. How long did this take?" He looked at the pot. 6 hours. 6 hours. In an apartment kitchen that had never been used for more than reheating takeout, with handwritten notes from Tasha and none of the instinct that comes from standing in a kitchen at age 5 with your arm aching from stirring. I took a spoon from my drawer. I tasted it. Cayenne hit first too hard. Then the sausage, properly cooked, and the shrimp, which he'd added in the right order. The roux flavor was there under everything, not what it should have been, but real. The bones of Big Mama's recipe were in this pot. I could hear her voice through the wrong proportions. I recognized it, all of it. What it cost him, what it meant. He was watching my face. I took another spoonful. I went to the cabinet and found the bowls. I ladled out 2, mine first, then his. I set his across the counter. I sat down. He sat. I ate every bite. The way he had eaten every piece of untouched japchae standing at my counter at 9 p.m. without sitting down or heating it because it was mine and he wanted to show me what that meant. He was doing it the other direction now, full circle. By the time I finished, my eyes were burning, not from the cayenne. I set down the spoon. "The roux broke," I said. "I know." "Big Mama would have something to say about that roux. Tell her I'll try again. Something cracked open in my chest. Jinwoo. I know it's not right, he said quietly. I know it's bad. I know you can taste every place where I didn't know what I was doing. He put both hands flat on the counter, the same way I'd pressed my hands flat on the bar in my empty restaurant while I tried to find my footing. But I made it with my own hands in my kitchen that has never been a real kitchen, because I needed you to know that I will enter your world as badly and as honestly as it takes. He looked at me steadily. I am not going anywhere, and I will learn to make the roux right, whatever that takes. I looked at the empty bowl in front of me. Big Mama Lucille's gumbo recipe, made in 6 hours in an apartment kitchen, broken roux and all. I stood up. I came around the counter. He stood too. I put my hands on both sides of his face and I kissed him. Not the way the moment in the kitchen had almost gone 4 months ago, interrupted and unresolved. This one was real. This one was the full weight of everything that had built toward it. The grocery store parking lot, and the doenjang braised short ribs, and the lapche he ate standing up, and every phone call and every dinner where I'd kept my face smooth and carried it in my bones. He pulled me close, both arms around me. The pot of broken gumbo was still on the stove. The cast iron skillet was on its burner the way it always was. The kitchen smelled like cayenne and something like home. I pulled back and looked at him. The restaurant, I said, I know. There's something you need to hear about what happened. He nodded, and his jaw had that particular set it got when he was prepared to receive news without flinching. I told him about Auntie Sukhi. Not what I knew because I hadn't known. What Tasha told me afterward, what the kitchen staff had seen. Auntie Sukhi had been coming to Beaumont's for weeks. She'd found it through a food blog, the same kind of trail he'd followed to the Friday pop-up 2 years ago. She'd eaten every time. She'd been telling everyone she knew about the chef who was doing something extraordinary on Broughton Street, including Yoon-hee Park. I had been at my prep station the afternoon they came in, a Friday reservation, 4:30, before the pop-up evening. I had been working on the roux for the dinner service, the proper version, dark and patient, stirring at medium-low until the color was exactly what it should be. Tasha came through the pass. "Table 5?" she said, with a specific look on her face that made me set down my spoon. I looked through the pass-through window. Yoon-hee Park was sitting at table 5 in my restaurant. She was in the cream coat, immaculate. She had not yet opened her menu. She was talking to the woman beside her, Auntie Sukhi, who was gesturing as she spoke. Around them, 3 other women from the church circle, the same women who had whispered about my unsuitable food at their Saturday potlucks, arranged around Beaumont's white linen table like guests who believed themselves to be somewhere extraordinary. Which they were. They just didn't know yet who had built it. I watched them order. I watched my server bring the amuse-bouche, the smoked catfish with Carolina Gold Crisp, the dish that had made one food critic cry in print. I watched Yoon-hee Park take the first bite. I watched her close her eyes. Not a polite close, not a performance of enjoyment close. The involuntary kind. The kind that happens when something reaches past your defense and does what good food does when it's made right. The church circle ate their way through the tasted menu, course after course. I could hear fragments from the kitchen, the way sound carries through a restaurant that's run properly, the low rise of voices when something lands the way you intended. At course 4, I heard Yoon-hee Park say, in the caring voice of a woman accustomed to being heard, "Now this is real cooking?" Every insult she had ever delivered to my food arrived in my chest at once, stacked and precise. The smell's a bit strong. The interesting lemon tart, the confusion, the stick to ordering takeout she had never quite said to my face, but had communicated across 6 months of dinner tables through every small and deliberate gesture of contempt. And she was sitting in my restaurant saying, "Now this is real cooking." I untied my apron. Tasha turned from the pass-through and looked at me. "You sure?" she said. "I'm sure," I said. I walked out of my kitchen. I have been in professional kitchens since I was 21 years old. I know how to move through a dining room. I know how to arrive at a table without apology, without explanation, simply present. I walked to table 5. Auntie Sook-hee saw me first. I watched it cross her face in sequence: recognition, confusion, calculation. And then the bottom fell out. She made a sound, something between a word and not a word. Yoon-hee Park turned. I watched her face. She looked at me for the space of 1 full second, and her expression did not change because she was a woman trained to maintain composure at all times, and her composure lasted exactly 1 second. Then the color drained from her face, not slowly, all at once, the way a roux burns, instant and total. Her mouth opened. She looked at the plates in front of her. She looked at the room she was sitting in, the white linen, the 12-burner range visible through the pass-through window, the name above the door that she had read without understanding what it meant. Beaumont's. The woman who had said her food smelled, who had called the dish she made out of 2 grandmothers' kitchens a confusion, who had called an anonymous tip to a health department because she wanted to make sure Maya Beaumont understood her place. That woman was sitting in Maya Beaumont's restaurant, having told her church circle that now this is real cooking. She couldn't take it back. She had already said it. In front of 4 witnesses, I stood at her table. She looked at me. For the first time since I had met her, Yoon-hee Park had nothing to say. The woman who always had something to say. The woman who had critiqued my every dish, my every choice, my every presence in her family's orbit. She had nothing. Her mouth was open and there was nothing there. Auntie Sook-hee was looking at her own hands. The church circle women. The women who had whispered she can't cook at their potlucks. The women who had validated every syllable of Yoon-hee Park's year-long campaign were staring at their plates. Some of them understood. Some of them were still catching up. I did not say anything about the health department. I did not say anything about the japchae. I did not say I told you so in any language, spoken or unspoken. Big Mama's voice, that Savannah voice that had been in my ear since I was 5 years old, with my arm aching from a cast iron skillet. Never let them see you bleed, baby. I had not bled for them, not once. Good evening, I said. I'm Maya Beaumont. I'm glad you're here. I hope the food has been to your liking. I kept my voice warm because I am a chef, and these were guests in my restaurant, and I came out to greet my guests. That was all. That was everything. Yoon-hee Park's hands were in her lap. Her composure had come back, some of it, the external architecture of it, but underneath I could see what was happening. She had spent 6 months being certain. The certainty was gone. She was sitting in the proof that she had been wrong in a way she could not revise or walk back or reframe as concern for her family. She had been praising my food. She had said now, this is real cooking. Mrs. Park, I said, not warmly, not coldly, level. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the meal. I turned and walked back to my kitchen. The power is in what you don't say. Tasha was at the pass-through. She looked at me as I tied my apron back on. Well, she said. Well, I said back. I picked up my spoon. I went back to my roux. Dark and patient and absolutely correct. I heard the table behind me go quiet, in the way that a room goes quiet after something has happened that everyone present will be telling stories about for years. That quiet was enough. Jinwoo listened to all of it without moving. When I finished, he reached across the counter and covered my hands with his. She knows now, he said. She knows. What do you need from here? I looked at him. This man who had eaten my rejected food, standing at a counter without sitting down, who had sat across from his mother in her kitchen and said out loud everything he had let happen, who had spent 6 hours in an unused kitchen with a broken roux and too much cayenne and Big Mama Lucille's recipe in his uncertain architect's handwriting. I need you, I said. Right here, standing with me. I'm not going anywhere, he said. The same words I'd said to him months ago, in the shape of a different room, full circle. We have some things to say to your family, I said. Not tonight, but soon. My father called me yesterday. he said. He found out his assistant booked my catering company for the Beaumont account that the client renewed specifically because of my food. He had to call his own client to understand what happened. I looked at him. His face, Jinwoo said. I think you can imagine. I can, I said. He wants to talk. He said it carefully. Not to perform, to talk. Good. And Sujin. He paused. Her Daljabi caterer just canceled. She has 3 weeks. I knew what he was asking before he asked it. Tell her to call me? I said. His hands tightened over mine, just briefly. Outside, the October evening was doing what Savannah evenings do, going blue and cool, the marsh smell coming in off the water. The kitchen held us both, the smell of broken gumbo and cayenne, and the faint warmth of the cast iron skillet on the burner behind me. Some things don't need announcing. Some things are yours to carry. I was still carrying them, and now I had someone beside me who had earned the right to carry them too. The ruse, I said. What about it? I'll teach you. He looked at me. Something moved through his face that I did not have a word for and did not need one. Okay, he said. When? I picked up the pot of broken gumbo. I set it on the stove next to the cast iron skillet. Now, I said, start with the butter. We stood in my kitchen until almost midnight, teaching him the roux. I made him start from scratch. New butter, new flour, the cast iron skillet on medium heat where it belonged. He stirred. I watched. When he tried to rush it, I put my hand over his on the wooden spoon and said, slower. When the color started to shift from pale gold towards something deeper, I said, now you're listening. He watched the surface of the roux, the way he'd watched my plates at the supper club on those first 3 Fridays, with the specific attention of a man who understands that looking is the first form of respect. By the time the color was right, his shoulder was aching. I could tell by the way he kept working it without stopping. That's the roux, I said. He looked at it. That took 45 minutes. That took 45 minutes of not stopping. There's a difference. He looked at me with that long, direct look I had never stopped finding everything. Show me what comes next, he said, and so I did. We put the broken gumbo away and started over together. It was nearly 1 a.m. when we finally ate. The kitchen smelled like everything right, that deep, patient smell of a roux given exactly what it needed. I set 2 bowls on the counter, and the cast iron skillet was on its burner behind me, and the Savannah night was blue and quiet outside, and this was the kitchen that had held everything over the past year, the attacks and the silences and the I love you and the separation and the return. It had held all of it. Now it held this. We ate, we didn't talk much, we didn't need to. I kept replaying the afternoon in my head. Yoon-hee Park's face when she turned and saw me standing at her table, the color leaving it all at once like something struck. The 4 church circle women staring at their plates, the plates made by the hands they had whispered about for a year. I did not feel triumphant. What I felt was quieter than triumph, more settled. Something had been named that could not be unnamed, and I had not had to say a single word beyond hello to make it happen. Big Mama's voice, steady in my ear. Some things don't need announcing. I had been announcing myself the whole time. Not with words, with every dish I brought to that table, every bowl of rice I rinsed in someone else's sink, every bite of my food Jinwoo ate when his family wouldn't. I had been speaking in the only language this story was ever going to understand, and now they had all finally heard me. Jinwoo stayed until 2 a.m. When he left, he paused in the doorway, exactly the way he used to before any of it. Just stood there a moment, taking in the kitchen, the light, me. What happens tomorrow? He said. Not a question. Tomorrow we keep going, I said. Same as always. He nodded. He left. 3 days later, Sujin called. Maya. Her voice was careful, not cold the way it used to be. Careful the way a person is careful when they owe someone something and don't yet know if it will be accepted. Sujin. A pause. My caterer canceled for Hana's doljabi 3 weeks out. She stopped, then quietly, I know what I'm asking. I know I don't have the right, but you're the only person I trust to do this right. For her. Her voice shifted at the end of that sentence. Not performing. Real. I thought about Han, the baby I'd seen at family dinners, round-cheeked and bright-eyed, who had nothing to do with any of it. Tell me the date, I said. She gave it to me. I checked my calendar. I'll have Tasha send the contract Monday. A long silence. Then, Maya. I was performing. I wasn't evil. I was scared of losing her approval, and I used you to keep it. That's not an excuse. I just needed to say it out loud. I know, I said. I watched you do it. I'm sorry. Come to the restaurant, I said. Bring the kids regularly. She made a sound I recognized, the sound a person makes when relief is larger than they expected. 2 days after that, Jinwoo told me over Thursday dinner that his father had called. His father had reached out to the client himself after finding out his assistant had booked my catering company without knowing. The client told him the deal closed because of the food. That chef closed the room, not the presentation deck. He asked us to come to Sunday dinner, Jinwoo said. He told my mother to be silent. He paused. Not a suggestion, the way he talks to the company board. The father who had enabled every attack from the beginning. The man whose silence had always been his permission. Something had shifted when his own business told him what he'd been refusing to hear. Are you going to go? I said. Are we going to go? He corrected. Yes, I said. We'll go. That Sunday dinner was not comfortable. Yoon-hee Park sat across the table from me and ate without commentary, without the small cutting observations I had braced myself against for a year. She ate. She was quiet. She looked at me once across the table and I looked back. Neither of us smiled. But she did not look away first. That was the beginning. Auntie Suk-hee was notably absent. No one mentioned it. I did not ask. The church circle, Tasha told me later, had sent a handful of messages to Beaumonts, some apologetic, some just inquiring about reservations. I read them and put them aside. Some things you let settle in their own time. We did Hana's doljabi 3 weeks later. Tasha and 2 of my line cooks, the food done right, Korean and Southern side by side the way it always should have been, galbijim and cornbread, japchae and braised greens, the banchan spread, and my smoked short ribs on the same table. That is what a party looks like when it belongs to a child and not to anyone's argument. Afterward, when the guests were gone, and we were breaking down the setups, Soo-jin came and stood beside me and said, You were extraordinary. I looked at her. Don't argue with me, she said. I've eaten everything you've ever cooked and I knew it every time. I just didn't say it. I laughed. It surprised me. She laughed too. The first real laugh I'd ever heard from her. The proposal came in November. Not at a restaurant, not with a speech. He came over on a Thursday with no wine and no leftovers and his hands empty. He sat at my counter and looked at me and said, I want to marry you. I want us to build what we've been building with a name on it, a permanent name. He had his grandmother's ring. His mother had given it to him the week before, without explanation, without ceremony, just placed it in his hand. That was how I knew her slow thaw was real. Not a speech, an object. The thing she carried from Korea, given forward. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We got married on a Saturday in March in the garden behind Beaumont's because that is where we began. In the food and the Friday nights and the 200 strangers who lined up to taste the same hands his family had dismissed. 40 people. Everything that mattered was there. Big Mama Lucille wore her best green dress and a hat that had its own weather system. She sat in the front row, and when I walked down the aisle, she put one hand over her heart and pressed her lips together and said absolutely nothing, which from Big Mama means everything. Mama Denise cried from the moment I appeared quietly, with dignity, the way a nurse practitioner manages her own crises. Auntie Carolyn beside her made sounds of sustained appreciation instead of crying, the kind that carry 3 rows. Tasha stood with me. Before I walked, she leaned in and said, "I told you it was about him and not his mother." She was right. I did not tell her so because she doesn't need more reasons to be confident. Yoon-hee Park sat on the groom's side, 3 rows back. Gray silk dress, hands folded in her lap. She watched her son stand at the end of the aisle the way a woman watches something she almost destroyed and chose, at the last possible moment, not to. I did not look at her for long, but she was there, and that meant something. Not everything, but something. His father sat beside her. He stood when I appeared at the end of the aisle, not because it was required. The ceremony wove both our worlds the way our food had always woven them. Jin-woo's older brother, Seung-jae, read a blessing in Korean. Big Mama Lucille read the 23rd Psalm the way it sounds in a Savannah church, with rhythm in it, with weight. There was a Korean tea ceremony. There was a second line at the reception because Auntie Carolyn had been planning one since the moment I called to say I was getting married. Jin-woo's vows were short. He is not a man who uses more words than he has to. He looked at me and said, "I have been eating my way toward you my whole life. Every meal I've had since the first Friday has been the best thing I've ever tasted. I promise to keep choosing you and to keep failing at the roux until I get it right." His father laughed. His mother pressed her fingers to her mouth. My vows were longer. I had been writing them in my head since November. I said I had been cooking since I was 5 years old, and I thought I knew what food was for. I thought it was for nourishing people and building things and proving something, and it is all of those things. But I've learned this year in this kitchen that it is also the bravest language I know. The one you speak with your hands when words run out. You learn to speak it for me. You learned it badly and honestly and with a broken roux and too much cayenne, and I ate every bite. I will keep eating every bite for the rest of my life. That is my promise to you. Big Mama made the sound that means she is not crying. She was crying. After the ceremony, she found me near the gift table. She pressed the cast iron skillet into my hands, wrapped in her good Sunday dish towel, the same way she had the morning I left for culinary school. "Your mama's name is on the bottom," she said. "Same as mine is, same as my mother's. Now yours goes on too." 4 generations of names scratched into the bottom of a cast iron skillet. 5 now. "Some things are yours to carry," she said. "I know, Big Mama." She patted my face once. "You carried it well, baby." Then she went to find the food. Yoon-hee Park found me an hour later near the end of the reception, the garden quieter and the lights in the live oaks going warm against the March dark. She was holding something, a small folded piece of paper, the kind from a good writing pad, covered in careful handwriting. She held it out. I took it. Her mother's miyoguk, the birthday seaweed soup her family had made in Korea, the one she had cooked for both her sons every year of their lives. Handwritten, precise, with a note at the bottom in smaller script: "The dried miyog must soak for 30 minutes, not 20. She always rushed it. Don't rush it." I looked at the recipe. I looked at her. She had been crying. Recently, I thought, though she had composed herself, her hands were very still. "I would like to come to your restaurant," she said, "if that is acceptable." "You're always welcome at Beaumont's. I would like," she said more carefully, "to come and eat and to watch and to learn." She paused. "If you would teach me, one dish, one of your recipes." This was her apology, not the words she was saying, though she was saying them. The asking, the willingness to come into my kitchen as a student of something she had spent a year trying to dismiss. That was the bridge she was building, plank by plank, in the only language this story had ever understood. I folded her recipe carefully. I put it in my jacket pocket. "Call the restaurant on Monday," I said. "Ask for Tasha. She'll find you a time." She nodded. She pressed her lips together. She turned and walked back toward the light, toward her son. The months that followed were the quietest I had known in years. Good quiet. The kind that settles after a long noise has finally stopped. Yoon-hee Park came to the restaurant for the first time on a Wednesday in April. Alone. She sat at the two-top near the window and ordered the tasting menu and ate every course. When my server brought the amuse-bouche, the smoked catfish with Carolina Gold crisp, the same dish she had eaten the day of the reveal, she picked up the spoon and did not pause. She ate it all. She said nothing about the smell. She left a note with the check. 3 words in Korean, which I can read better now than I could a year ago, because Jin Woo has been teaching me the same way I teach him, slowly and without quitting. The note said, "Chalmukio seoyo." I ate well. The word of thanks, what you say to the person who cooked for you when the meal was good. She came back the next month and the month after that. She never said the food smelled strong again. 4 months after the wedding, Jin Woo came by the restaurant on a Tuesday evening, still in his office jacket, the way he had come to Tasha that first Tuesday when everything was still uncertain. He came through the front door this time. He found me between the line and the pass-through. He came to the edge of the kitchen and I looked at him, and something in my chest did the thing it has been doing since October in a parking lot off Abercorn, that particular movement that I stopped trying to name a long time ago. "Good day?" he asked. "Long day." I handed him a knife and a cutting board. "Mirepoix," he groaned. "You have improved," I said. "You are still not good." That is simultaneously encouraging and discouraging. "Welcome to cooking." I went back to my station. "Smaller dice." He chopped badly, with tremendous concentration in the specific face of a man doing his best at something that does not come naturally. My line cooks pretended not to watch. Tasha did not pretend. His mirepoix was irregular and imperfect. I used every piece of it. This is our kitchen now, the one on Broughton Street that belongs to both our worlds. The 3-month wait list is now 4. Jin Woo comes by after work and chops vegetables badly and eats everything on his plate and asks me questions about the food the way he asked them on those first 3 Fridays, with the attention of a man who understands that a meal is a language and he is still, always, learning to speak it. Once a month, Yoon-hee Park comes in for dinner. She sits at the table near the window. She orders the tasting menu. She eats everything on every plate, every course, every bite. She never asks what it smells like. On the shelf above my prep station, where I can see it from anywhere in the kitchen, the cast iron skillet sits where it has always sat, dark and seasoned and warm. 4 generations of names scratched into its bottom. 5 now. Beside it, tucked into the frame of the shelf, is a small folded piece of paper from a good writing pad. Careful handwriting, a recipe for myeokguk. With a note at the bottom, "Don't rush the soaking. 30 minutes, not 20. 2 cultures, 1 kitchen. Some things don't need announcing, some things are yours to carry, and some things, if you are patient and honest and willing to cook badly and try again, become yours to keep."